Hello, everybody, and welcome to You'll Like 'em, the podcast where we give recommendations on music, movies, television, and basically talk about anything else that comes into our heads during the recording. My name is Connor. I am half of the You'll Like 'em team, the other being my friend Josh, who we could not meet up this week to record together. So I spoke to him and ran this idea by him that perhaps once every other week, so say the first week of the month, we would release the podcast, and maybe the second week of the month, we would do a short episode where one of us talks about either a specific topic or just gives a couple recommendations. And he said that would work, so we're trying that out this week. It's just me today, and you're gonna see why I usually have Josh with me, because I'm just gonna fucking ramble, and it's not gonna be very coherent or cohesive, and I'm also not the funny one. Josh is the funny one, so yeah, be ready for that. This is gonna be probably a little more serious. Maybe I'll make a couple jokes and they'll not land, but let's go right ahead. This week, I want to talk about a couple recommendations I have, a couple for music, and then one for a podcast that I've been listening to. I'll talk about the podcast first because that is probably what I'll go the least into detail on. The podcast is a podcast named Sardonicast. It is made up of 3 YouTubers that Yaskovich and I enjoy, those being YMS, Your Movie Sucks, Adam, lad from Canada, Ralph the Movie Maker, or Ralph Seppi, a filmmaker slash YouTuber from the United States, and the third being Alex, or I Hate Everything, a YouTuber who is known for his reviews and videos on movies. Specifically, he does a lot of bad movies. He does a series called Search for the Worst. He's from England, and the podcast is I'm only on the second episode, but so far both episodes have been over 2 hours long. So if you're not a fan of overly long podcasts, then this might not be for you. I personally enjoy it because I do a lot of driving for work. So putting something on when I'm driving is nice to have something long that I don't have to keep changing every time like it ends. Some shorter podcasts like do me a couple of journeys. But this one's nice and long, and I don't have to worry about turning off. And the stuff they talk about is interesting. They talk about movies they've seen. They do questions, like Q&A kind of thing from fans. And they also they all watch a particular movie. It doesn't have to be a newer movie. It can be an older movie. And they all give their thoughts on it and talk about whether or not they liked it, stuff like that. And it's very interesting, and one of the things I like about it is, as I've mentioned, each member of the podcast is from a different country, and I do not believe they have, spent much time in person with each other, but they have such a good relationship between all 3 of them that it's fun to listen to these 3 friends laugh and joke with one another over a Skype call, regardless of the fact that none of them are together and have a physical in the same room relationship, if you know what I'm saying. It's very, some of the stuff they talk about is very interesting. They talk about their opinions on these movies, which are not always popular. The episode I'm on currently, they discuss Black Panther and how they did not enjoy Black Panther, and talk about the reasoning behind it, which is very interesting. I enjoyed Black Panther, but listening to justification on why they didn't enjoy it is very enlightening, and It's a very interesting podcast. I highly recommend it. And I'm going to talk about a couple bands today, being progressive rock bands. And if you listen to the show, or if you know me, I adore progressive rock. It's my favorite genre of music, which is not very fortunate because it's a very unpopular genre. I feel that it gets labeled as pretentious a lot. The fans get labeled as pretentious, and the music gets is called like very like long-winded and very egotistical. A lot of it's very like just wankery on instruments. Long sections where all the members they have their solos, and then a couple different time signatures, a few more solos, some lyrics about something very fantastical and based in like these long poetic segments, and those parts I all thoroughly enjoy. That's why I like it. I think it's very interesting. I think all the musicians in these bands are extremely talented. I think the songwriters are for the most part are very talented as well. Some bands, you listen to the lyrics and you're like, these are a bit off, but so progressive rock, for those of you who don't know, originated around like the late 60s, early 70s in England, and came from bands who incorporated like classical elements into their playing, and with many, like in classical music you have long pieces with several movements in that one piece, and it can at one point be like a very like melodic upbeat part of a song, and then like shifts to a minor key, and it's a very interesting concept at the time, making these long elaborate pieces, which were a lot of them were very based in very lush and like pretty sounds. Not all of them, of course. You get bands like King Crimson, who were not so much interested in making beautiful pieces as they were making very intense and powerful pieces. But the like I said, the whole concept behind it was more classical influences, and came from a lot of like classically trained musicians. But over the years, as with many genres, it evolved. It incorporated different genres in there. Some, like Yes, have been known to incorporate styles like Steve Howe, the guitarist, uses a lot of flamenco and South American like influences in his playing, and jazz and stuff like that. So like with every genre, it evolves over time. And when you got to like the 80s and 90s, especially into the 2000s, a lot of these prog rock bands were incorporating a lot of heavier musical aspects into their playing. Take, for example, Opeth, a band, a progressive rock, progressive metal band that took aspects from like death metal and bands like Celtic Frost, and made a sort of death metal, progressive metal band, which had like lengthy pieces that had a lot of virtuosity displayed by the members of the band, and mixed between very emotional and pretty sounding vocals with poetic lyrics to the death growl vocals. And this brings me to two of my recommendations, I should say. The first being a very new band, and when I say new, I mean their first album came out in 2010, I believe, and that is an English progressive metal band called Haken, Haken, They are a progressive metal band who from England who have incorporated aspects of like death metal. Like there's like the harsh and distorted vocals that the lead singer does, but there seems to be, and I've listened to almost all their albums now, and it seems that they lean more towards the progressive rock side in their later stuff, with the elements of metal in there, like the intent, like the double bass drums and the distorted guitars, but with also the sounds of like these older progressive rock bands. There's a track off their album The Mountain called The Cockroach King, which spans from like sounds of bands like Gong, who were very like lighthearted and almost psychedelic, but still in the progressive rock vein. Gentle Giant, a much more classical based and influenced band, and with known for their strange and complex vocal harmonies. If you want an example of Gentle Giant's use of interesting vocal harmonies, the song "Knots" off of the album Octopus is absolutely bizarre. And there's a in the Cockroach King by Haken, the vocal harmonies in that they're like nods to Gentle Giant in the sound, and it changes from this like very majestic sounding progressive metal sound to like it's almost goofy sounding prog rock thing with they bring in, they incorporate the mouth harp into it, like the doing 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 sound, and it's a very interesting display of the band's versatility as far as different styles go, all again within the vein of progressive rock and progressive metal. So Haken, very interesting. Their first two albums were concept albums. The first one based around the concept of a fisherman finding a mermaid, discovering that her blood can help with the state of the environment. It's whether or not it's ethical to use her to help the planet, or if to protect this rare creature. And the second one being the story of a child who sees their own death and spends the rest of their life trying to avoid said death. And that's another element of progressive rock, is like I said, the very poetic lyrics, but also the idea of concept albums, and a whole album with an overarching story or themes to it. For example, Pink Floyd's The Wall is a rock opera technically, but a concept album about the damage that the psychological damage through a person's life, what effects that can have later on in life, and if they decided to shut themselves off from society, what that would do even more to their mental health. And you have other albums that are just around certain themes, not even about a specific story. Like there's not a narrative throughout. It's just maybe all the concepts on this particular concept albums deal with literary analogies or references, or the ideas of like over like different ideas that somehow all relate back to the same concept. Thus, concept album. That, like I said, that is a major theme in progressive rock, are like concepts that are found on multiple songs on one album. And that a lot of times puts people off because they're like, oh, this is a fucking story. Like, I'm listening to music for the music. I'm not listening to like get a story out the lyrics. Which is strange because there are a lot of pop songs and rock songs that are very narrative based and people still enjoy. And some of these songs out of context people still enjoy. So concept albums overall I don't have an issue with, and I can understand why people do have an issue with maybe a concept that's harder to grasp. I find the concept of quadrophenia hard to follow, which is technically a rock opera, but trying to get what they're going for in that sometimes makes me scratch my head a little bit. The same with Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick, which was made as a parody concept album. I can't make head nor tail of what the concept of that album is supposed to be. I'm sure if someone told me, I might listen back and go, well, I understand now. But back to Haken. Very, very talented musicians. Richard Henshaw, the guitarist, is very talented, classically trained pianist, like is with progressive rock, the classical training, and self-taught on guitar, and it doesn't show. He plays the guitar like a fucking wizard. He's incredible. Ross Jennings, the lead singer, has a very interesting voice that I'm a huge fan of. He has this like tenor voice that is often almost throaty at times, but like in the back of the throat, almost like that. But it doesn't it's not grating, I feel. So other people might listen to them and be like, I'm not a fan of his voice, and that's totally all right. I don't expect every recommendation we give out on this show to appeal to everybody, but check out Haken. The albums they have are Aquarius, Visions, The Mountain. They have an EP, Revelation, I believe it's called. I'll need to double check that while I discuss the next band. And their most recent album, Initiate. And the next band I want to talk about is the band Riverside. They are a Polish progressive rock / progressive metal band. And let me just double check this. Restoration, not Revelation, is the name of the Haken EP. So the Riverside are a progressive metal band from Poland, and they are really, the more I listen to them, the more I adore them. Their lead singer Maritz, goodness. It is Polish, so I'm not 100% sure of its pronunciation. Marius? I'll spell it for you. It's Mariusz Duda, Duda, and I'm sure it's not pronounced Duda. Has an absolutely incredible voice. He's very, very pretty tenor voice that can sound, like I said, very pretty and mellow, and he can also do very powerful and intense harsh vocals, not like Opeth or anything like that. Just a good comparison for this band honestly would be they are a more mellow Tool. MD, I'm going to call him that, MD, has a voice that is similar to Maynard at times, not exactly the same, and he has a heavier accent, but he does share like a similar timbre, I think, to Maynard from Tool at times, and also the very like a lot more darker sound to their songs, being more in the progressive metal vein. So as our Tool, not quite as dark and like heavy and almost doomy as Tool are, but they do go off on these long instrumental passages in their songs. Their first album, which is called Out of Myself, is very good. The opening track, The Same River, is it is like 10 minutes long. So again, if you're not a fan of these longer tracks, they do have shorter tracks, but they are very. It is a very good album to listen to. Less than an hour. I mean, you can sit through that and be done. Um, this Out of Myself is very good. My favorite so far is their second album, Second Life Syndrome, which is still in the same vein as the last one, that progressive metal. I believe this one was described by the band as being heavier than the last one, and I have noticed that it was a little heavier. But the song Second Life Syndrome, 15 minutes long. Love them long prog epics. Has been described, I believe, by fans as the like signature sound of the band, like the almost signature song. So even if you just want to listen to one song, see if you like it, check out Second Life Syndrome. And even if that's too heavy for you, they do have an album named Love, Fear, and the Time Machine that came out in 2015. And that one's, from the sounds of it, is a little more mellow and a little proggy with like synths and keyboard works. And it's good from what I've heard of it so far. I haven't finished that one either. I'm going through in order of their albums, and that is not the next album up on my queue. But their guitarist, Peter something, committed suicide, unfortunately. So I'm not sure what the future of the band is. They are definitely worth a listen. So yes, looks like they are still continuing. But I'm not sure if if that's going to be for much longer, or if they're going to hold off for a bit now after the death of Peter Grudzinski, perhaps. He is an excellent guitarist, very melodic, in the same vein as, say, like Steve Rothery from Marillion, David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, and Andrew Latimer from Camel. They are very atmospheric in their sound. It's not really about like a lot of virtuosity. There's not like Haken does have very like moments kind of where the song will kind of almost pause and let a couple of the musicians just kind of solo for a bit. Riverside just is more about like I said, melodic playing from Grudzinski, I guess is how it's said. I apologize to anybody who's Polish and is like, that's, I know how to say that. I'm looking at the band now. That's a very easy name to pronounce. They do have that like almost neo-progressive sound, which is very melodic and, as I've said about 5 times now, atmospheric. But with the metal coming in there, they are in probably like similar veins to, say, Porcupine Tree or Opeth. I feel if you do enjoy Opeth, you would enjoy Riverside. They're very similar bands, and of course the Tool aspects too. So check out Love, Fear, and the Time Machine, and the song Second Life Syndrome, if you want to get a good idea of this band. So like I said, this was going to be a shorter episode because I didn't want to talk for an hour and put you guys through that. So thank you for listening. You can find us on iTunes. Been neglecting to say that in the last couple episodes that we've done. We are on iTunes. And we are part of the 100 Years podcast family, let's say, which includes the show the show that Josh is also on, which is Friends by Default, which also has Brooks Vernon, who has also been on the show, Liam Wallace, who has helped out with sound quality assurance, let's say. on other previous episodes, and our friend Zach Teal, and they talk about just kind of anything. They do hypothetical situations, and they kind of had fun with that. It's a good listen. Definitely check them out. They also have the podcast Noise Choice Boys, which is a one-off so far, done by Liam and Zach, which I believe is a improvisational comedy podcast, and that is available on the 100 Years YouTube channel. And of course, You'll Like 'Em is also part of that. And there is a Patreon page. I will put a link of that in the description if you want to go fund that. That goes to the whole podcast family. So you would be supporting us, you're supporting Friends by Default, and just it would really help us out. And if you want to give us a rating on iTunes, that would really help us out too, and just help spread the word around. You know, we try and get some publicity on Twitter and Facebook. But if you guys just share and tell your friends, hey, there's this podcast that talks about music and movies, and you should check it out. We'd appreciate that so much. That would help us out a great deal. And you can find us on SoundCloud if you're listening on there. At Conor and Josh's You'll Like 'Em podcast. On Facebook under the same name, and on Twitter, our Twitter handle is at You'll Like 'Em pod, all together, no spaces, no capitalization, no punctuation, anything like that. And I'm also on Twitter currently as at Keith Moon is God. I've been trying to change it. I've been told you can change it, but I've been having the worst time with trying to figure that out. And I believe Josh is at JBY Films. So you can follow us on Twitter at those handles. And next week we will be doing the regular length episode, the full hour and a half episode. And I will give out the rest of my recommendations. I still have a couple more that I was planning on doing. If we'd recorded the full-length episode this week, it would have been like me talking for probably the whole time about these bands and progressive rock and stuff like that. But thank you guys for listening, and we will be back next week with our usual show. So thank you guys for listening, and bye-bye.